The bell above the heavy glass door of Robin's diner chimed loudly, cutting through the low hum of the mid-morning lull. Mrs. Henderson did not immediately look up from the cash register, her hands moving with practiced efficiency as she counted the float. The diner was quieter than usual, the absence of Kira's precise, rhythmic chopping at the prep station leaving a hollow space in the ambient noise. "I need 2 coffees, black, and the truth about what happened to my niece." Mrs. Henderson paused, her fingers lingering on a stack of $5 bills. She looked up to find Deborah standing on the other side of the counter. Deborah was a formidable woman in a thick, navy blue parka, her expression carved from the same unyielding ice that currently covered Lake Winnipeg. She carried the scent of wood smoke and bitter cold into the diner, demanding immediate attention. As Kira's aunt on her father's side, Deborah was the one who had navigated the complex legal and medical bureaucracies during the pandemic, securing Kira's right to live independently when others had pushed for institutionalization. Mrs. Henderson, whose loyalty to Kira stemmed from a long-standing friendship with Kira's maternal aunt, instantly recognized the fiercely protective glint in Deborah's eyes. "Take a seat at booth 3, Deborah," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice dropping to a serious, confidential register. "I will bring the pot." Moments later, the 2 women sat opposite each other in the worn maroon vinyl booth. The neon open sign in the window cast a faint, reddish glow across the scratched Formica tabletop. "The town is talking," Deborah began, her voice tight with suppressed anger. "I went to the hardware store for salt, and I heard 3 different people whispering that Kira had a psychotic break, that she completely lost her mind at a luxury hotel in Winnipeg and had to be dragged away by paramedics in restraints. Tell me that isn't true." Mrs. Henderson poured the hot coffee with remarkably steady hands. The diner's espresso machine hissed loudly in the background, a sharp mechanical sound that punctuated her frustration. "The rumors are garbage, Deborah, manufactured garbage. Kira didn't have a break. She was poisoned." Deborah's hands flattened against the table. "Poisoned? By a jealous, malicious ex-girlfriend of the boy Kira is seeing," Mrs. Henderson explained, her tone sharp with disgust. "The woman broke into Kira's apartment right here in Gimli. She pulverized Kira's prescription medication and swapped the backup supply at the pharmacy with a highly concentrated synthetic hallucinogen. Kira took it, thinking it was her daily citalopram. Her system was flooded with an unverified chemical variable. That is why she was hospitalized." Deborah processed the information, her rigid posture faltering slightly as the sheer cruelty of the act settled into her understanding. "Where is she now?" "Selkirk Mental Hospital," Mrs. Henderson said softly. "She is undergoing a 21-day telemetry hold to flush the toxins and rebalance her baseline. She is safe, Deborah. She is healing." Deborah picked up her coffee mug, taking a slow, deliberate sip. Her protective instincts, momentarily shocked by the revelation of the poisoning, rapidly reorganized themselves around a new target. "You mentioned a boy, a boyfriend. Where was he when this happened? Is he the reason this maniac targeted my niece?" "His name is Jessie," Mrs. Henderson said. "And yes, his ex is the one who did this. But before you go hunting him down, you need to understand something important. That boy is the only reason Kira survived the breach. He has been her absolute rock. He covers her shifts here so she doesn't lose her station. He respects every single one of her rules. I have watched him seamlessly adapt to her world without asking her to change a single thing about herself. He is perfect for her." Deborah narrowed her eyes, unconvinced by the sentimental defense. She had spent years fighting neurotypical median people who claimed to have Kira's best interests at heart, only to abandon her when her autistic traits became inconvenient or overwhelming. "Perfect is a very strong word, Helen. I do not care how well he chops vegetables or plays along with her routines. If his past is a threat to her safety, he is a massive liability." "He is fixing it," Mrs. Henderson insisted. "Right now as we speak." "I will be the judge of that," Deborah said, sliding out of the booth and pulling her gloves from her pockets. "When he gets back, you tell this Jessie that I want a meeting. I am going to run my own diagnostics on him. If he is good for her, I will know. If he isn't, I will personally ensure he never steps foot near her again." 2 miles away, on the desolate, snow-packed perimeter of the local Dairy Queen parking lot, Jessie sat shivering in the passenger seat of an unmarked police sedan. The engine was off to avoid drawing attention, and the interior of the vehicle was bone-chillingly cold. Detective Ryan leaned over from the driver's seat, his breath pluming in the freezing air as he taped the final wire of a covert recording device securely to Jessie's sternum. "Keep your posture loose," Ryan instructed, peeling the backing off a final strip of medical tape. "The microphone is highly sensitive, so try not to cross your arms tightly over your chest. It will muffle the audio." Jessie stared straight ahead at the frosted windshield, his jaw locked tight. He was wearing his heavy winter layers, but the cold seeping into his bones had nothing to do with the Manitoba winter. The thought of sitting across from Darcy, of looking into the eyes of the woman who had intentionally shattered Kira's meticulously constructed universe, made his stomach churn with violent friction. "I know the technical parameters," Jessie said, his voice flat and detached, slipping briefly into the clinical cadence he usually reserved for Kira before correcting himself. "I know how the equipment works, Ryan. Just tell me how you need me to play it." Ryan sat back, pulling his own collar tight against the draft. "You need to act like you have seen the light. Darcy's entire motive is built on the delusion that Kira is fundamentally broken and that you are just playing nursemaid out of some misplaced guilt. She thinks she did you a favor by exposing Kira's chaotic reality. You have to lean fully into that." Jessie's hands curled into tight fists resting on his thighs. "You want me to agree with her?" "I want you to make her believe she won," Ryan corrected gently. "You have to look exhausted, Jessie. Play the part of the beaten-down ex-boyfriend who finally realizes that dating an autistic girl is too much work. Tell her the hospitalizations, the strict routines, the lack of normal affection. Tell her it finally broke you. Let her think you are desperate for an out and that you finally understand why she did what she did." The instruction felt like a physical betrayal. To utter those words, even as a deception protocol, violated every moral value Jessie held. He loved Kira precisely because of who she was. Her routines were not burdens. They were the shared architecture of their safety. Her affection was not lacking. It was mathematically pure and fiercely loyal. To portray her as an unmanageable burden was a grotesque corruption of their reality. He thought of the sweet egg sushi they shared, the precise way she folded her hands, and the absolute trust she placed in him when the world became a sensory nightmare. But Jessie remembered the pink, linoleum common room in Selkirk. He remembered the profound exhaustion in Kira's hazel eyes, the unearned shame she carried for simply trying to survive the biological violence Darcy had inflicted upon her. Kira had authorized this sting. She had calculated the variables and trusted him to execute the maneuver. "She has to confess to the swap on tape," Jessie verified, his voice dropping into a lethal, quiet register. "I get her to admit she funded the break-in and substituted the citalopram with the hallucinogen." "Exactly," Ryan said, passing Jessie his thick insulated jacket to cover the wire. "If she admits to administering a noxious thing with intent to endanger life, I can bypass the silent contractors entirely. I will have the arrest warrant signed before her coffee gets cold. But she won't confess unless she feels completely secure. You have to sell the lie, Jessie. You have to look at her like she is your salvation." Jessie pulled the heavy jacket over his shoulders, zipping it up to conceal the wire. He closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, visualizing Kira's face, mapping the familiar geometry of her features, and drawing on her unyielding logic. He was the physical firewall. To protect the core system, sometimes the firewall had to absorb the virus. "I am ready," Jessie said, opening his eyes. The warmth and compassion that usually defined him were entirely absent, replaced by a cold, operational focus. Let's go delete this variable. Deborah pushed through the heavy double doors of the Selkirk Mental Hospital. The oppressive scent of industrial bleach and boiled institutional food instantly clinging to her thick navy blue parka. The corridors were long and sterile, washed in a sickly fluorescent hum that seemed to vibrate directly against her teeth. As she navigated the intake wings toward the designated telemetry ward, her heart executed a slow, dreadful drop. The people she passed along the way were profoundly unwell, caught in the invisible undertow of their own fractured realities. A man in a paper gown was arguing furiously with a blank wall, while an older woman wept silently over a puzzle missing half its pieces. It was chaotic, heartbreaking, and entirely uncalibrated. Deborah tightened her grip on her purse, feeling a deep, suffocating panic that this was the absolute worst possible environment for her niece's meticulously ordered mind. She expected to find Kira curled into a defensive posture in a corner, perhaps rocking to self-soothe in the face of such profound sensory contamination. Instead, as she rounded the corner into the visitor waiting room, she heard a sound that made her freeze completely in her tracks. Laughter, loud, uninhibited laughter. In the far corner of the room, sitting cross-legged in a faded vinyl armchair, Kira was hunched over a bulky hospital-issued computer monitor. She was watching a video series titled Your Grammar Sucks, her shoulders shaking as the host mocked terrible internet spelling. The pure, unmasked joy on her face was a startling contrast to the bleak institutional backdrop. For a moment, Deborah just stood there, overwhelmed by the resilience of the young woman she had fought so hard to protect. "Kira," Deborah called out softly, stepping into her line of sight. Kira's head snapped up. For a fraction of a second, her round hazel eyes darted, assessing the new variable. Then, absolute recognition flooded her features. She sprang from the chair, entirely abandoning the video series, and closed the distance between them. Before Deborah could even brace herself, Kira wrapped her arms tightly around her aunt. It was a firm, solid hug, a rare physical override of her usual proximity protocols, broadcasting exactly how happy she was to see a trusted family variable. Deborah exhaled a shaky breath, returning the embrace fiercely. "Look at you," she murmured, pulling back just enough to inspect Kira's face. The harsh chemical toll of the hallucinogen had left her slightly pale, but her eyes were remarkably clear. "How are you feeling, sweetie?" Kira stepped back, realigning her posture to a comfortable baseline. "It is a highly inefficient state," she reported, her brow furrowing in a clinical analysis of her own biology. "The telemetry hold requires constant monitoring, but the primary anomaly is internal. Being high energy is structurally exhausting. The adrenaline tax is completely unsustainable." Deborah offered a warm, knowing smile. "Well, you were never exactly high energy to begin with. Even when you were a teenager, you were essentially a goth mixed with a tomboy. You practically lived in combat boots and oversized black shirts. You only occasionally wore dresses, and even then, only in very specific shades of blue and purple." Kira nodded, entirely agreeing with the historical data. "Dresses lack utility for daily operations. The fabric-to-skin friction is unpredictable, and they offer zero thermal regulation in Manitoba weather. Wearing them all the time is simply inconvenient. It requires too much work to maintain a functional baseline while constantly managing hemlines." "I couldn't agree more," Deborah said, her chest tight with immense relief. The toxic variable had not rewritten Kira. She was still perfectly herself, calculating and wonderfully precise. Meanwhile, 30 miles away, Jessie pushed open the glass door of the Dairy Queen. The blast of warm, sugary air did nothing to thaw the ice in his veins. The wire taped against his sternum felt like a branding iron, a physical reminder of the deception he was about to orchestrate. He walked straight to the counter, keeping his shoulders slumped and his gaze heavy, adopting the exact physical posture of a man who had finally been crushed under an unbearable weight. "Chocolate chip cookie dough blizzard," Jessie ordered, his voice deliberately hollow. "Make it two," a voice chimed in from right behind him. Jessie stiffened, forcing himself not to recoil as Darcy's cloying. Floral perfume cut through the smell of deep-fried food. She stepped up beside him, her blonde hair perfectly styled, wearing a smug, triumphant smile. Ordering the exact same item was a calculated mirroring tactic, a pathetic attempt to force a false sense of alignment between them. Jessie paid for his own ice cream without acknowledging her offer to cover the bill, taking his cup and moving toward a secluded plastic booth in the corner. Darcy followed, sliding into the seat across from him. She took a delicate bite of her blizzard, watching him with predatory patience. "You look terrible, Jessie." "I have been at the hospital," Jessie said, staring down at his melting ice cream. He let his voice crack perfectly, channeling his genuine exhaustion into the lie Detective Ryan had constructed. "They have her on a 21-day hold. The doctors keep talking about baselines and sensory overloads and toxic flushes. It never stops." Darcy's smile widened slightly, a glint of vindication shining in her eyes. "I tried to warn you. You wanted to play savior to a broken machine, but you can't fix her. She is fundamentally incompatible with the real world. The routines, the rigidness, the total lack of normal human emotion. It was always going to break you." Jessie dragged a hand over his face, hiding the absolute revulsion twisting in his gut. "I love her precisely because she is not like you," he thought violently. But out loud, he surrendered. "You were right. I can't do it anymore. It is suffocating. The hospitalizations, the constant management. It's too much. But I don't understand how it happened so fast. One day we were fine, and the next she just completely shattered." He looked up, locking eyes with Darcy, projecting a desperate, hollow need for answers. "How did you know it would break her so completely?" Darcy leaned forward, lowering her voice, eager to claim credit for his supposed liberation. "Because I know how fragile her little ecosystem is. I knew if I removed her crutch, she would collapse." "But how?" Jessie pressed, leaning in closer, ensuring the microphone caught every single syllable. "You couldn't have just guessed her medication schedule. You had to know exactly what she was taking." "Of course I knew," Darcy scoffed, her arrogance completely blinding her to the trap. "It wasn't hard to find out what kind of happy pills she relied on. I paid a guy from the city to smash that deadbolt on her Gimli apartment and pulverize her blister packs. That was just the distraction." Jessie held his breath, keeping his expression perfectly blank. "And the hallucinogen. I swapped her pharmacy back up myself," Darcy confessed, her voice dripping with venomous pride. "A highly concentrated synthetic substitute. I slipped the pharmacist's assistant $2,000 to look the other way while I replaced the citalopram. I knew the moment she ingested that unverified chemical, her entire robotic brain would short-circuit. I did it to show you the truth, Jessie. I did it to save you from her." Jessie stared at her, the silence stretching long and heavy over the table. He felt nothing for the woman sitting across from him, no anger, no betrayal, just the cold, absolute certainty of a resolved equation. The hostile variable was permanently neutralized. He slowly pushed his untouched blizzard across the table. "You didn't save me, Darcy," Jessie said, his voice dropping the exhausted charade and returning to its normal, unyielding pitch. "You just gave Detective Ryan exactly what he needed." Darcy's triumphant smile faltered, confusion warring with a sudden, sharp spike of panic. Before she could process his words, the heavy glass door of the Dairy Queen swung open, and Ryan stepped inside, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. The trap had closed. The click of the handcuffs echoing in the Dairy Queen felt like the final keystroke in a massive system reboot. Detective Ryan secured Darcy's wrists, reciting her rights as her smug facade fractured into genuine, terrified disbelief. Jessie did not stay to watch the officers guide her, into the freezing parking lot. He simply exhaled a breath that felt like it had been trapped in his lungs for days, the crushing weight of the deception protocol lifting from his shoulders. The hostile variable was offline. Before making the drive to the hospital, Jessie pulled into the snowy lot of a local drugstore. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as he navigated the narrow aisles, bypassing the standard chocolates and mints. He crouched near the bottom shelf of the candy aisle, his eyes scanning the bright packaging until he found exactly what he needed. 2 bags of sour gum chews. Kira had once explained that the intense, predictable burst of acidity helped forcibly reset her sensory intake when her environment became unmanageable. They were a functional tool wrapped in sugar, and right now, she needed every operational advantage she could get. The drive to Selkirk Mental Hospital was a blur of gray highways and biting wind. When Jessie pushed through the heavy double doors of the facility, the immediate sensory assault of bleach and institutional despair made his jaw clench. If this environment was abrasive to him, he knew it was a catastrophic bandwidth drain for Kira. He signed in at the front desk, securing his visitor pass, and walked briskly down the long, linoleum corridors toward the telemetry ward. Jessie paused at the threshold of the visitor waiting room, mentally preparing to deliver the operational update. He stepped inside, expecting to find Kira isolating in a quiet corner. Instead, he froze. Standing beside Kira was a formidable woman in a thick navy blue parka, her posture radiating an intensely protective authority. Jessie instantly locked up. His hands darted instinctively behind his back, his fingers interlacing tightly as a sudden, heavy spike of nervousness grounded him to the floor. He had mentally prepared to handle Darcy, but he had absolutely no protocol for navigating an unannounced family variable. Kira turned, her hazel eyes locking onto him. Without a microsecond of hesitation, she abandoned her structured distance parameters and crossed the room. She wrapped her arms around him in a firm, grounding hug. Jessie carefully returned the embrace, mindful of his cold jacket, before she stepped back to align them side by side facing the woman. "Aunt Deborah," Kira said, her voice utilizing a formal, highly structured cadence. "This is Jessie. He is my designated constant and my boyfriend." Deborah scrutinized him, her sharp gaze sweeping from his messy, wind-blown hair down to his boots. She took a deliberate step forward and extended her hand. Jessie unclasped his hands from behind his back and met her grip with firm, respectful pressure. "Mrs. Henderson told me about you," Deborah said, her tone cautious but deeply observant. "You should know that Kira living alone in Gimli was an experiment. We fought very hard to establish her independent grid during the pandemic when a lot of people thought she belonged in a place exactly like this. I do not tolerate anything, or anyone, that threatens that stability." Jessie met her gaze squarely, speaking in the normal, grounded cadence he used for the rest of the world. "I completely understand, ma'am. Darcy's interference was a massive breach, and it is my fault it reached Kira. But Darcy has just been arrested. Detective Ryan took her into custody 10 minutes ago. She is permanently removed from the equation. I am here to make sure Kira is protected from anything that comes her way. I will not let anyone disrupt her safety again." Deborah held his gaze for a long moment, searching for any trace of hesitation. Finding none, her rigid posture softened incrementally. She released his hand. "Good, because as soon as this telemetry hold is finished and she is discharged, I expect both of you at my property. We are having a post-release celebration. I have already arranged for a wagon ride driven by a skidoo." Kira visibly stiffened beside Jessie, her brow furrowing as she processed the logistical nightmare of a family gathering. "That introduces multiple uncalibrated variables," she stated, her breathing hitching slightly. "You know I am not a social butterfly. My energy reserves will be depleted from the hospital extraction, and the family unit is loud. Also, my brother will be there." Jessie turned his head slightly, offering her a steadying look. "What are the parameters regarding your brother?" he asked, seamlessly slipping into the precise language she required. "He is 2 years older than me biologically," Kira explained, looking up at Jessie with a flash of genuine anxiety. "But his developmental baseline is younger. His physical compression algorithms are completely unregulated. He initiates massive bear hugs without issuing any prior proximity warnings. It is structurally overwhelming." Deborah offered a fond, somewhat nostalgic smile. "He just loves you, Kira. You have always been so serious about family events. When you were a teenager, you used to insist everyone call you Wednesday because you thought the character's absolute lack of cheerful emotion suited your baseline perfectly." Jessie felt a warm rush of affection at the image of a younger Kira adopting a fictional gothic persona to establish boundaries. He reached out, gently pressing the 2 bags of sour gum chews into her hand. Her fingers instantly traced the familiar plastic packaging, her shoulders dropping an inch as the tactile familiarity registered. "The hostile variable is offline," Jessie told her, keeping his voice low and mathematically calm, meant only for her processing array. "The perimeter is secure. As for the wagon ride and your brother's unregulated physical contact, we will manage the exposure time together. I will function as your physical firewall. If the sensory input reaches critical capacity, we will initiate an immediate withdrawal protocol." Kira looked down at the sour gum chews, then back up into Jessie's deep brown eyes. "You are confirming that you will intercept the bear hugs." "I will intercept every unauthorized hug," Jessie confirmed, his expression entirely serious. Then he let a small, reassuring smile break through, shifting his tone slightly to address both Kira and Deborah. "Besides, I promise you, no matter how chaotic the wagon ride gets, it cannot possibly be as weird as the variables in my family. I will do anything you need to keep your grid stable." Deborah watched the exchange, noting the seamless way Jessie translated his affection into a language Kira could easily process without feeling overwhelmed. For the first time since walking into the hospital, the older woman looked genuinely at ease. The diagnostics were complete, and the results were flawless.